The title of this video is Beyond the Goetia, and I'm doing it this way because I think people need to understand a few things about the Goetic spirits. Okay, now these are things from my research, my experience, my gnosis with these spirits, and some of this is in my book. I try to make it pretty clear in my book, but in case I missed anything, this is something that sort of supplements that. In the Goetia is essentially, let's first discuss what it is. The Goetia is essentially a Rolodex of spirits with a few rituals in it to help conjure them. And these spirits were compiled actually from older works that were, maybe 100 years older or so. The Ars Goetia and most of the books of the Lesser Key of Solomon, that is all comprised of this. Really, the earliest record I can find of them existing was from the 14th or 15th century or 16th century. So right around the year 1400, 1500, 1600. Those are the earliest really any that anyone can point to that those books existed. And I do believe that they were most likely created in that time either as forgeries or as just the personal grimoires of people who were working with these spirits in their way. They may have been based on something, however. I'm not saying that they weren't. It is entirely possible that some of these things were based on things, but I will say that the iteration that we see in the books that we can acquire is heavily, based upon the Christian thinking of the time that they were found in. They referenced beings like Lucifer and things like that that would not have been known to man in the form that they take in the Goetia during the time of King Solomon. So we can basically say that more than likely these books are in some way fabricated. And this is one of the reasons why I use chaos magic rather than some form of strict adherence to any given system that is found traditionally, because a lot of them have questionable or at least controversial origins. So it's very difficult in some cases. What I find when I research legitimate sources, legitimate books of magic and practice of the ancient peoples, is they're more like Bibles, or they're more like religious practices. So when you have like the Book of the Dead, for example, things like that. And as much of a spell book as that is, it's meant to be used in the afterlife. It's not meant to be used while you're living. So a lot of these things are hard to really pin down as to their origin. And the Goetia is a little bit, in some ways, easier because it was based upon, from my experience, some literature from Johann Weyer or something like that, who created the Pseudemonica Daemonium, and his work is essentially, I believe it's based on one other person, but essentially this work was designed not to be a ritual tool, but to actually disprove the reality of spirits. It was meant to be some kind of proof. It was like an early psychiatric work, believe it or not, that was meant to disprove the existence of spirits in the sense, and to prove that people who were working with these entities were actually just delirious and suffering from delusions, however they classified it back in those days. So what we need to do is we need to recognize in our practices that the Goetia is not some kind of a Bible of hidden spirits that have been missing for centuries or something like that. This isn't some ancient practice that goes back to, the dawn of time where these spirits were worshipped. This is a more, when I say modern, I don't mean current, I mean more modern in the grand scheme of things, iteration of working with different entities. Now, it is my firm belief through experience that these entities, at least the ones I have worked with, are one of two things or three things. They are gods that were once worshipped by cultures in ancient times, which one way or the other were demonized by the Christians of the period, and their expression was tainted in the European culture. So you might have, for example, people in the Middle East still worshiping Baal, okay? And they worship Baal the way they believe is best, based upon tradition, whatever, going back thousands of years potentially. But then you take Baal and you move him into Europe, and through word of mouth and through the demonization from the Christians, and Baal becomes Baal, and Baal becomes this chimera of a human head, a toad, a cat, or all three individually, or however they want to manifest, with all of these strange implications about invisibility, etc. But that's not really you know, Baal is Baal, and Baal is Baal, and they're the same force. And people can contact either aspect of that same force. So you can contact Baal as you see it in the Goetia, but the problem is that is not the more, we'll say, traditional view of that spirit. So what we need to do is, that's number one. Most of these entities, a lot of them, especially the kings, and some of the others, are really ancient gods from antiquity and other cultures that have been demonized, Christianized, and westernized. And these were appropriated into their culture and used as demonic, things. Now, this wasn't done, I don't believe, necessarily by spiritualists that much. I think a lot of this was the collected folklore for these catalogs. So this gentleman, Johann Weyer, whatever his name was, went around talking to people who were in institutions or in churches, whatever they're being, maybe, in the Inquisition or whatever. He was interviewing them. I should look up more history on this to be more precise, but I believe, just from my gut instinct, he was probably interviewing these people, asking them about their beliefs and cataloging the spirits that these individuals were working with. And this was more of a folklore for them. So you have a spirit, for example, President Malphas, and there's some others that take on the crow and raven, visualization aspects and principles. But President Malphas in particular, he's very much, if you look at all the things he's associated with, really reminds you of a crow. I mean, it's almost like someone took a crow and made a demon out of it. And this is, if you study European folklore enough, you'll find that there were many, ancient cultures that revered ravens and crows and treated them as magical, and many other cultures did as well. I mean, you have the Native Americans. The crow spirit is a very, it's a trickster spirit, which is the same thing in the Goetia. So he's essentially a trickster, because if you're not careful, he will deceive you if you make offerings unto him, if you sacrifice unto him, I should say, which is very much like what a crow would do. If you're always feeding crows, they'll trick you to get more food. So that's something to keep in mind. So these spirits are, in many cases, either old gods or, the folklore of local custom created and turned into demons. You have like the Jersey Devil, for example. Now, that's not in the Goetia or anything like that, but we have a folklore. If you look it up, there was the Jersey Devil. There was this incident where this being that was said to look like a goat, or the body of a goat and the head of a man or something like that, was running around terrorizing people in New Jersey. I think it was in the 1800s. Given enough time and belief, these things could be seen as demons by the folklore of the time. If you went back into the 1600s, instead of it just being a weird ghost or a weird monster or, maybe a devil, these things become demons that people work with in their black magic rituals and things like that, potentially. Or just the folklore people are scared of. So Johann Weyer creates, his Pseudemonica Demonium, and based on these folklore things. And some of this could be urban legends, and they create an egregoric reality. So as these people believe them strongly enough, it can create an egregoric reality. Another example would be the Mothman. Given enough time, Mothman would be, the Mothman would be in a modern grimoire of Goetia. It absolutely would be, 100%, especially if people were theoretically, calling upon this spirit. So that is a large part. So let's review again. You have pagan gods. You have essentially folklore that creates these strange creatures, and you have potentially just the imagination of people creating egregoric manifestations or demonized folklore. So that is this. If you want to sum up the Goetia, that is what it is. Now, that doesn't mean you can't work with it. You can work with it exactly as it's written, because the entities that are associated with it are generally real. So far, I haven't found any that are not. They do exist. You can contact them individually, and they all feel different. They all have different traits, different personalities, different this and that. But they may not be exactly what they are in the Goetia. Now, they will represent themselves as such, because it's kind of like if someone calls you Ralph long enough, you just take to the name. You just kind of get over it. And these spirits don't have a physical, anchor in reality like we do. They don't have a body that they associate with the same way we do. They may have a body, but it's non-local, it's dispersed, it's the air in the sky, that kind of thing. So what they are doesn't have as much strictness about it, and they're astral, which means that all of what can be imagined is available to them to manifest with and to use and to identify with. They have the most of them, especially the more powerful ones, are what I call sentient or conscious archetypal energy. So they are basically an archetypal principle that has become sentient over time from one way or another, either through human interaction, through just being a powerful spirit, through belief, whatever means that you want to give it. So these entities are roaming around out there, perfectly willing to respond to these titles, names, imagery, etc. But you will find, if you are a devout, demonologist or someone who works with these spirits in a respectful way, you will find that you may begin at first working with them as they appear in the Goetia, but eventually your awareness of them will shift. And your awareness of them will shift closer to what they want you to know about them. So you'll begin by calling upon them using the Goetia, one method or another. My methods preferably. At least don't use the disrespectful methods of the Solomonic rituals. But you will call upon these spirits, and they will appear to you, and they will work with you. And over time, just because of your idle curiosity, if nothing else, you'll be researching them, and you'll be finding out facts about them that are different. Because you'll learn, and again, Baal is the best example of this because he's the most obvious. There are several, but he's the most obvious. That if you do a little bit of research, you will find that he traces back to a pagan god that was demonized. The most hated of the pagan gods in the Judeo-Christian tradition is Baal, more than any other. There's a whole bunch of Bible stories about the conflicts. I mean, I could go into it, but I won't. So there's a lot of things there about him, and he's one of the most, if not the most, demonized pagan god. And so when you start working with him a little bit, over time, your awareness of him will shift from a scary demonic god to something a little bit more akin to what the ancients would have seen, which is not a demon that can make you invisible and has a toad and cat and man head and maybe spider legs or whatever else was dreamed up by people in the past. You will begin to see a bull-headed or calf-headed entity, and for me, I'm at the stage now where I see him primarily as darkness from the movie Legend. That is how I interact with him, and I use that kind of imagery, bull imagery, things like that. And I no longer see him as this spirit that just grants invisibility. This is a god, the dark aspect, I should say, of a god or archetypal energy, which is a god of fertility and storms. He's kind of a rather all god, so to speak. He's got a lot of aspects. Like he took a lot of, through conquering other gods, or however you want to say he did this, he's acquired the aspects of different elements. So he's not simply just an earth god or a sky god or something. He's a god of storms, of lightning, of that kind of stuff. He's a god of the earth and fertility. He's a god of fire and sacrifice, and he has a lot of different things that are about him. In fact, he's quickly becoming one of my favorite Goetic kings. But there are many others that could be traced to other things. You have a lot of lion imagery in the Goetia, could be traced back, most likely, I believe, especially in the case of Marbas and probably Vine, to lion-headed gods and goddesses of the Egyptian heritage. I believe there is most likely a very strong connection between Marbas and Sekhmet. May not be the same spirit, but there's definitely a connection. There's definitely, if you want to go from history, there's definitely a lineage there that might have influenced this Goetic incarnation. So again, if we're looking at the idea that there's sentient archetypal energy, if you look at what Sekhmet represents and what Marbas represents, you'll see there's some correlations, and it could be, it's very likely. And when I ask them about that, I get sort of an affirmative, okay? And sometimes this is the thing about spirits. When you're asking them for information, a lot of times they will give you information that's only meant for you, that doesn't necessarily correlate to anything in the world. And this is why it gets a little tricky, and I'm going to be doing another video on something I call internal versus external reality, and that's an important thing as well. But you will find that these spirits will give you information that's meant for you and you alone, and is not meant for the world to know, because it either cannot be proven, conflicts with what the world believes, or is meant to just be a message for you to guide you in a certain direction for a little while in belief. Because that belief, even if it's not in something that is objectively provable in the world, that belief alone, that shift in awareness and belief, gives you a magical power and experience. It's very important. People don't understand that a lot of what we do in magic, at least this kind of magic, is an attempt to shift our awareness around and learn to be able to control our belief systems. I often tell people, that I am able to shift into a skeptical mindset and to shift between currents. And there's a lot of truth to that. What I can do is very easily, most of the time, I can shift from one current to the other, although the mood has to strike me. I can't just suddenly go from Goetic magic to Lovecraftian, working with Nyarlathotep necessarily. But I can usually shift my focus and beliefs a little bit on a whim. I can be a skeptic for a while. I can convince myself that I'm a skeptic again, if I have to, if it's required to protect me from magic, because skeptics are one of the hardest people to attack, believe it or not. Not always, though. Skeptics are often unprotected, but their disbelief protects them, believe it or not. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is that we need to go beyond the Goetia at some point. Those of you who are working with the Goetia, those of you who are using that as your source, as your main pantheon, you need to recognize that that is literally just a medieval text, a late medieval, early Renaissance text that is basically a bunch of superstitious imagery about folklore and pagan gods that was amalgamated into this one tradition that is usable and is utilitarian in its nature. It can be used exactly as you see it. But over time, you will start to be pulled in the direction of seeing these spirits as something more or something extra or something different. And as you do so, try not to resist it. Just try to keep your head. Don't just fall for everything that you see. Try to verify what you find. Try to do your research. And the spirits will appreciate it because you'll get a stronger connection to them. As I have, initially when I worked with Bale, he was very adamant, some things are not meant to be known. That was the message he gave me. And I do believe that some of his history is lost to time. And I do believe that the reason I had a hard time finding out is because, those who demonized him didn't want people to know what he really was. And they wanted him to be hidden. They wanted him to be hard to see. That's perhaps where his aspect of invisibility comes from, is that he is hidden. He is very much hidden in plain sight as what he is. So, as I have just had patience and just done my research, I've come full circle, and instead of being confused about who and what he is, I have come to understand him better and now work with him using more of the imagery and iconic the icons of his historical pagan origin. Of course, I'm still using the darker aspects of that. I'm still seeing him as a quote-unquote devil, even though I don't see him as the devil, but I'm still using that imagery because it's inspiring to me. And it seems to be more effective for me. But that doesn't mean that's what he is, because these things aren't those things. They are not what we limit them to be. They are far bigger and greater, just like you are not what people limit you to be. So that's it for this video. I might have some more thoughts on it, and I'll add to it if I do. There might be a cut here, but I think that's it for now. If I don't have anything else to say, you will probably be treated to my begging you to consider helping me out and purchase my services. So I'll leave you to it. Thanks for joining me.
Show me your support by making sure to like and comment on this video. Subscribe and hit the bell for updates, and then, if you wish, share this video responsibly. If you want to support me further, or want to know more about my practice, or learn to master your own, consider purchasing my high-quality book, Become the Maelstrom. The link is in the description. If you need my help, or want to book my professional services, you can contact me directly on Facebook, or go to FromTheAshesPublishing.com and look for my list of services under Magical Services. If you do not see a specific service or ritual that addresses your concern, contact me and I can tailor-make a custom ritual working just for you. The link for all this are in the description. Thank you, and mind the shadows.